I think I come out cheaper paying them as a consultant too. So that's something else that a lot of your senior people can help you as you're thinking through these grants about that. But find them and get them on board. The other thing I do is I get a completely different person who's not part of the team before I submit the grant, and they become my external reviewer consultant before the grant ever goes in. And what I do with that in terms of before the grant ever goes in, I also pay them $1,000. I pay them, I give them the grant like 4 weeks before I'm turning it in, maybe sometimes 3. And their job is to provide me with the most critical NIH review that they could ever possibly give someone. And a month before it's due is really good, because this is when you think it's perfect. You think it's perfect. There's nothing else. If you do this right, and you think it's perfect, a month before it goes in, and you think everybody here has made you change things a million times, you just give it to an external reviewer and have them go out there and read it, and that is the review you would have gotten had you submitted it. And believe me, you do not want to waste your first review. You only get 2. You do not want to waste your first review on what that external reviewer is going to tell you. Can you get people to do it for less? Yes, I've gotten people to do it for $500. But you do want to get somebody to give you that review, okay? Who has experience doing real reviews for NCI. Or I say NCI because that's what I'm funded, and whatever funding agency you're going after. Also, you're going to hire consultants to work on your team. You're going to have co-investigators on your team. You need to publish with them prior to submitting this grant. Papers and abstracts. So you literally need to look at your team members, and you need to look at what abstracts you are planning to submit in the next 12 to 6 months before that grant goes in, and you need to make sure every single one of them gets on those abstracts. Now, how does that happen? It's really easy. You give them the abstract, you help have them read it, you help have them give you some feedback on it, you add them as a co-author, even if they weren't working with you on that project from the beginning. Because they're going to be working with you on the next project that you're doing based off of that. And people reviewing this aren't going to believe that you're going to work together unless they've seen some proof that you've worked together. So if you can get them involved in the interpretation of your results, the making sense of your results, the interpretations of your results, the submission of the abstract, and obviously the publication of the paper, you're establishing those relationships. Hopefully you've had them all the way back from the get-go, but if you haven't, then you still, and you've got to show the tangible support. When you say we've worked together, and you need to go. In my grants, I have a co-investigator working with me, and I am able to say things like, we have 18 papers together over the last 10 years. And I don't have to say anything else.
If you have patient partners, a community advisory board, members like that as part of your team, how do you write them in? They wouldn't be consultants, I think, or would they?
It depends on how they want to get paid.
Okay. Because the issue that I personally encountered with my grant was if you add them as a consultant, they need a biosketch. But like...
And they do. And we write them. We create the biosketches for them.
Okay. But even though they've never published, like, their contributions to science is just...
We have plenty of people in different roles. I have patient advocates who don't have publications. But
Yeah.
if you do your job right, I'm going to throw this out at you, okay? If you are working, name me a community organization that works with HIV. Yeah, that's your area.
Triad Health Project.
Triad Health Project. Oh, they were here when I was here. Lori, we did our project with them. So if I'm going to write in someone from Triad Health Project, and I actually want to give them compensation for working on my project, they're going to give me a letter of support for my grant, and I'm going to just give me a name.
Ed.
Ed is going to be on my grant, and I'm going to make him a co-investigator, okay? Or he's worked with me on the pilot that I've been doing to prepare for this, which is even better, right? So Ed's going to write the letter from Triad Health Project. This goes to my letter of support, all that. And then the next thing I know, I'm going to put him in. I want to pay him a certain amount of money. He's not an employee of the University of
Yeah.
of this university or another one. So I will pay him as a consultant for these services that he will do on the project. If I've done my job right, Ed should be a co-author on my abstract that I
Right.
published off my pilot. He should be a co-author on the paper that I've submitted.
Right.
I have a patient advocate who is working with me. My patient advocate gets paid she gets paid $4,000 a year. She gets $1,000 every quarter. If she gets to work on a particular project with someone, then my junior faculty are paying those patient advocates for every hour that they spend looking at their projects, giving them effort, giving them feedback. They are a real tried and true member of your team, and they are on the publications.
Well,
Hands
certainly,
down.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
just with it was hard to find where they fall in
And they don't
on
make-
the team,
Yeah,
right?
and they won't know how to make their own biosketch, so guess who
Right.
gets to do it for them?
Right. So even though there's no contribution to science, they've never published, you just,
Well, that's just an oxymoron, because I just said
Right.
you included them on your papers from the
Right.
pilot. So they should have some publications.
Right.
And in the new biosketch format, that, I'll keep going, because I'm not gonna get through all this. You can actually include abstracts. So if they've been on abstracts with you, they can put them on their CV.
okay, thank you.
Right? Okay, so let me go through a couple things, because I want to go through the ancillaries. Create your team, and you want to be sure to think about what your reviewers are going to expect in terms of members on your team. So sometimes we think of a team, and I think, well, we're the two smartest scientists in the world. We're going to partner in this. We're going to have a coordinator and a statistician, and we're good to go, right? But, whoops, I'm doing a project in oncology. They're going to expect me to have an oncologist. Oh, what do you mean? I have to go over here to Moses Cone and talk to an oncologist and get them to agree to be on my grant? How's all that going to work, right? So your job is to create the team and make meaningful places and meaningful contributions for them. And I made colossal mistakes early on in my career when I started to think things like, well, we don't really need them. They're not really scientists. They don't really publish. They don't really this. They don't really that. And I was thinking in my very privileged academic mindset. And I made a lot of mistakes of not having the right people on the team, and the reviewers let me know that right away. They said, where's your patient advocate? Where's your oncologist? Where's your this? Where's your that? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know I had to have these people, right? So you make sure your team is what you need it to be.
In public health, a lot of times, and we've done this with proposals, is we'll create an expert advisory panel. And that kind of gets around the biosketch too. So for the EAP, they're not considered consultants, so you don't necessarily need a biosketch. I think that's a better route, right, is to have them show as part of the team in the publications. But sometimes we'll create an EAP that's made up of 4 or 5 people that might have an expertise in a particular
Okay.
space, and we identify them as an EAP, and we pay them, but it doesn't list them under like key personnel kind of
Right,
for,
right,
yeah,
so
yeah.
they're just under other expenses.
But they serve
Yeah.
a purpose, like you're saying,
Yeah.
you definitely need that.
So you can choose to have them as key personnel or not.
Right.
And that will define also what you have to provide in terms of their paperwork. All right, so create your team. I'm just going to say this a couple times or to mention it, but it's always the devil's in the details when you write this. If you don't know your clinics and you don't know your population, you don't know your stakeholders, you're not going to be able to write this well. And you better fall in love with the process of writing, and you better view writing a grant as a creative process and love it. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to stay with it long enough. 2 other things. 1 year solid, working every single day on part of the real paperwork, writing part, is how much it took me to write my first funded R1. And you don't want to know how many years before that I spent collecting data and doing studies to get there, okay? So, it is everything you do, every single moment of every single day needs to be focused on that long-term goal of 2 or 3 years from now having that R1 in hand, okay? You're not going to have it in hand in 6 months, but you need to create the timelines and the steps to get you there, right? But I wrote every single day for a solid year on that document. Why? Because it's not just the 12 pages. It's all these other pages, right? So pull out those documents I gave you. So I'm just gonna, you can start to just kind of flip through and look at a little list, but I'm gonna run down the list. So not only do you write your research strategy, there are 17 to 18 different parts of this grant that you have to be able to write. Sections that you have to put pen to paper and write. 17 of them. Okay? That is not a little bit. And every single one of them counts. You cannot just do a one-off or do it really quickly and not really care about it. People used to think that you didn't have to care about ancillaries. That is not true. Ancillaries are your friend. The first one that I'm going to mention to you, and actually I have an extra one here if somebody would like an extra one at a table or a group. Yes. And if you, I'm assuming that since they don't all have individual copies, if we need to figure out a way to get someone a copy, can we do that? Yeah, okay. So the top page is your abstract. My abstract is actually the very last thing I write for the grant. It is not the first thing, it is the last thing I write for the grant. And in the abstract, which you have a really good one here, remember I told you this one actually funded, scored 16%. Okay, or it's not 16%, I'm sorry, it scored a 16. A 10 is perfect. And by the way, I've had 2 perfect grants in my lifetime. It can happen. Right? It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and work and a little bit of luck and timing, but you can do it. It's feasible. And I've actually had other colleagues of mine do it too. So in your abstract, I want you to write this at the bottom of the page. There's a recipe to this. And if you will look, this is exactly what Dr. Papone did with this project here. He's a mentee of mine who's now a tried and true colleague. You want to state your problem. So what is the problem you are solving in the world with this grant? And his problem is that the use of androgen deprivation therapy causes near total loss of testosterone in elderly prostate cancer patients, and it creates a whole slew of problems for them in terms of living and managing their quality of life. And some of those problems, like falls and other things that cause them to have to go get health care, increase the healthcare burden, okay? So he's got a really compelling problem there. Compelling. If you read those first 3 sentences, it looks serious, doesn't it? Well, that's the way you want it to look. You want that reader to read that and to get up out of your seat and go, this is a problem and we need to fix it. Let's see what they're going to do about it. Compelling. Numbers, facts, figures. Notice that he has all that in there. Then, our next recipe is, so what do we currently do about it? Do no treatments exist? Do treatments exist that aren't good enough? Do treatments exist that people won't do that are problematic? Maybe it's hard to find people that are qualified to deliver the treatments. There's all kinds of reasons, but you need to say what the problem is with the current environment. Then you introduce your solution, number 3. So, he's going to propose certain specific high doses of vitamin D. Then you come in with your feasibility or your preliminary data. For different things, it's going to look different. It's going to look like feasibility data, maybe safety, maybe tolerability, but maybe also initial efficacy that you saw. He's doing a large phase 3 definitive trial, so he talked about what he had from his phase 2 that actually showed efficacy. And so this sets him up to move forward to that phase 3. You can see he's laid it out specifically in this abstract. Focus that preliminary data on your primary outcome and maybe 1 or 2 secondary outcomes. If you measured 25 things in that preliminary study, but you're not looking at all of them, which I hope you're not because you will not get the grant if you are, focus what you found on the primary thing that's of importance here. Don't give me 25 findings from that preliminary data. Give me the 1 or 2 main things that make it really compelling. Maybe 3, but don't give me a lot. Then you go into your proposed project and have very clearly, explicitly stated aims. And you finish up with, your aims and sort of your methods in there. It's a little teaser in the abstract with your innovation and/or impact at the end. Again, you write this last. This is actually easy because you're going to have all these sentences written, and a lot of times I'm just pulling this into the abstract from other parts. But you need all those components there that I just told you about in that abstract. You absolutely have to have it, okay? The next one is your project narrative, page 14, which is your next page. This one's simple. The two key important things about the project narrative, again, this is like, sometimes even after the abstract, my last thing I do is the project narrative, because after I have everything done, I can do this pretty easily. You want this to be as simple language as possible. If your grandparents were reading this, you want them to know what you're going to do and why it's important. Public health impact. So it's lay language, and it's all about what we're doing and the impact. That's it. Those are the two things you got to make in your project narrative. Okay? Next, facilities. Okay. The one that everybody wishes we didn't have to do, that takes a long time, and it can seem very, very boring at times to have to do. But you will see that facilities takes up the next, I don't know how many pages. This is a big document. And this is a document that things like the institute or the university can be helpful with. If you flip through this, you will see that I talk about the university. I talk about the medical center within the university. I talk about the cancer center within the medical center. I talk about my research base, which is what the study is going to be conducted in. That's on page 18. I talk next about office spaces in the building that we have. I talk about my human performance laboratory. I talk about my psychoneuroimmunology laboratory that I collaborate with. I talk about a community engagement and training laboratory that we have. I talk about a writing program that we have for helping with publishing, writing articles. I talk about geriatric oncology program for working with specialized populations and older adults. I talk about our training program and how we train researchers and investigators in a whole bunch of different things that are relevant to grants and projects. I talk about our Clinical and Translational Science Institute, which you guys don't have here, but you could talk about any of your wellness center, all these things that you have. And you can see it just goes on and on and on with the kinds of stuff that I talk about. I talk about REDCap and how CTSI helps us with REDCap. Lots of detail. I talk about our library. I talk about our pharmacies and our drug services. I talk about my genomics research center that I collaborate with, the imaging center. So, you have to create this. I will tell you that at first, when I first started doing these, we never did pictures. We include pictures. We made that nice little diagram that's on the very front page of it. Yes?
Is it possible to specify that they be printed in color for the reviewers?
Well, reviewers won't, nothing will be printed for reviewers anymore.
Oh, okay.
Everything is completely online and electronic, so if you put it in color and I pull it up on my screen, it's going to be in color. And when if I choose to print it, it's up to me whether I print it in color or not. Right? And there are lots of people who don't print anything anymore. They do all that reviewing on the screen, but there are plenty of people who print. And you will notice that the pictures are big enough to be seen and be read. That's important. So you should print your pages when you're preparing it to make sure that when someone prints it, you can still read it. Because on a screen, I can pull it up and I can zoom in. But there's one thing you never want to do for your reviewers, and that is irritate the heck out of them. And I'm going to remind you, I don't review my grants at 9 o'clock in the morning when I just sat down in my office with my coffee. I have a full-time job that's demanding of me every day. I work all day long, every day, sometimes on the weekends. When do you think I'm reviewing your grant? on the plane to UNCG, I have grant reviews due at the end of this week, or at the middle of next week, actually, end of next week. So I'm on a plane, at home in the evening, on a Saturday morning, right? So it's all above and beyond my normal job, right? It's a service, right? So you want to make things easy for them to read, easy for them to access. So you got little tiny things, and I'm sitting here trying to read it on my laptop, and I'm having to roll the screen to get to read it. You are just, you inherently lowered my score of your grant, whether I mean to or not, because I'm a human being, and you just irritated me, right? So even though I don't think about it or I'm not meaning to do it, I'm a human. So, you know, you want me to give you a 40, and I probably just gave you a 50, right? I mean, you just want to make it easy on them. But pictures are really important. Diagrams are really important. How are you going to create this document? This takes time. You're at a university. Do you know all the bells and whistles and parts and pieces? How do you find them out?
Yes.
Esther.
You ask Esther.
Esther.
We have a lot of these documents for us.
So there's the Office of Research.
So we go and we ask, and then the other group, so this is something else too that like the center can help with some, is getting these documents, getting the word out. And I'm going to tell you this, and you guys should ask this of researchers, okay? It's a give and take. If you expect them to be able to give you these documents to help you, then every time you write one, guess what you have to do? You have to give it back. You have to give it to the Women's Center. You have to give it to the Office of Research. Every time you tweak it, okay? So that's very important, because what you get, you should also be talking if you have, you know, if you're going to put the Women's Center in your grant, you should be talking to everybody in the Women's Center. Where is it? Jess, right? Donna? You should be talking to you guys, talking to Dr. Schultz, talking to Dr. Weidman. What else can I say about the center that's relevant to my project that's going to make it look really good for my grant and the environment in here? What else can I say about the Human Performance Lab? What else can I say about the Department of Biology or this or that or whatever it is, right? And so that's the other part, is if you notice, there's the standard templated part, and then there's going to be little blurbs and pieces throughout about how this is really helpful for that particular project, okay? So lots of really good, compelling information, tweaking little parts of it as it relates particularly to your project or things that you've already done in the past with that institute. We published a paper with this group that they analyzed the epigenetic markers for us, and this paper for, you know, Dr. Popone, whatever. You get it in there. Pictures, lots of stuff. This takes time. This takes a lot of time. When I can work on this, when you should start working on this, even before you start writing your project. You could start working on a really awesome facilities document for yourself right now. Right? Among all the other myriad of things that you have to do every day. But facilities is extremely important. And you do want it to be a little bit personalized to your project. Pictures are good. This counts. People will look at this part of your grant. They may not look at your project narrative, but they will look at your facilities. I promise you that reviewers will go through that. They won't necessarily read it with a fine-tooth comb, but what you don't want is you don't want them to be reading on the one page and you messed it up and you have typos and your picture isn't printed right, because then they think you're sloppy. And that sets a precedent for your grant. You don't want them to think you're sloppy. Equipment, which is your next section. The things I want to say about equipment is this is more of the devil in the details. So if you think back, so what happened here, if you look at what Dr. Popone put in here, he now gets very specific about what's available in the office space to us. He gets very specific and he lists all the equipment in my Human Performance Lab that he is potentially going to be using for his project. He lists all the equipment and shows pictures of the straw machines and everything else that we're going to be using in the psychoimmunology lab for his project. So this is project-specific equipment. So you still mentioned all of those in facilities, but he didn't go on to all the little pieces of equipment that are unique to his project. Equipment is absolutely essentially unique needed for your project. Okay? Again, these kinds of things, you can start working on them. Because at the end, if you do it and you need to add something that you forgot, or you need to take something out that you're not using, you can work on these projects, or on these ancillaries. And I'll just throw this out there. What I do, and what I did early on with my colleagues, is we all were working on grants, so we got ourselves together and we conquered and divided. We split it up and divided and conquered. So somebody took facilities, somebody took equipment, we talked about different things, and we each started to develop things. And then we had a template that we could take and use. So we shared these things with each other, okay? This means you all win if you do that. New BioSketch format. And again, looking at these models is going to do far more for you than I am going to do saying anything. The new BioSketch, a couple things I want to say about that. Everybody was freaking out because they were like, oh, we don't have any funding on here anymore based on the new instructions, and that's not true. You can have funding on here, and it should be put in here according to the new BioSketches. There's places for it to be put. And actually, I think the one I gave you is not, it's not the newest version. I meant to give you the new version in here. Yes, so this is actually the older version. There's a newer version that's going to be required in January, which we already started using for some things. But what I want to mention about that when you're looking it up and putting it together is, it doesn't look like you put funding in, but under that introductory paragraph is right where you put your grant funding. You absolutely need to put it in there. And the other thing about the newer BioSketch is that they encourage any publications. So in this one, you are allowed to use abstracts. So if you've published some really cool cutting edge, especially under that top part in the first relevant publications to this proposal, not in the rest of it, but where it's really asking you about cutting edge stuff, they want to see your hottest, newest stuff. So they are allowing abstracts right now, which they didn't before. You didn't want to put that in before. Your budget justification, take a look at how much we write on the budget justifications. This is actually a slightly older version. And one of the things you'll find about these is that you are constantly updating them. Okay? So I might have written one 2 weeks ago, and somebody asked me for one now, and it's got my BioSketch has to be changed. Whatever we said in these paragraphs in the budget justification, it has to be changed. But it's no joke that we actually write pretty long descriptions of each other in the budget justification, okay? You notice up top, this may not be too relevant to you guys, but we use my NCORE network to do a lot of recruiting, so we have to talk about how there's not overlap of funding from NCI because we leverage multiple grants. You won't have to worry about that. But looking at the descriptions of the investigators, who they are, what they do, the principal investigator always comes first, everybody else after that. We usually try to, sometimes we put them in alphabetical order, sometimes we put them in order of contribution to the project. But you can basically see, we have nice detailed descriptions. We talk about joint publications, we talk about people's expertise and their experiences, what they've done, what their publication record is like, what their funding record is like. So we make the case that we have a really strong qualified team. That's important up front. And then the other thing that I would draw your attention to is in the back, page 129, when we get to equipment and supplies. These are not just one lines. We give a little bit of description about what each one of these things are. And sometimes you'll notice that we give a total dollar amount, but then sometimes you'll notice, like for example, under the men's Smart Cap pill bottles, we wrote total cost 366 participants times $100 each for $36,600. So sometimes you want people to be able to see how you get to that large number. It's compelling in your budget justification, not just, $155,184 for serum 25OH vitamin D testing. You give them a little bit of description of that. Okay? So, next section that I gave you And all of these are yours to keep as models. I hope they help. Introduction to the resubmission. There's a formula here, and I want you to make some notes on this and write this down, okay? First of all, you always thank the reviewers. Whether you're mad at them or not, you thank them, okay? Secondly, that crafting of that next paragraph in bold is no mistake, and it is incredibly intentional. This is where you take the reviewer's own words from your review. You take them, you organize them. I have my folks make a table. So we make a table and all of the things that are the judging characteristics of what a grant is judged on, all the good stuff they said in that category, all the negative stuff they said in that category. These are all the things you're going to respond to. These are all the little snippets and quotes and things you're going to use to create that paragraph that is in the top of that one-page response, which is how great and significant your idea is. Clinically important area. The proposed intervention, if effective, could diminish this pernicious side effect of therapy. Sounds great, doesn't it? They said that. You didn't say that. Your reviewer said that. Right? How wonderful to give them back their own comments and their own words at this. Same thing with the investigators. PI has the necessary expertise to lead this study. Team members have experience in prior successful collaboration. Blah, 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 blah. Innovation. The first multi-center RCT to test the effectiveness of high-dose vitamin D compared to RDA of vitamin D, recommended daily allowance, blah, blah, blah. Your approach. They've completed a pilot, they've demonstrated safety, they've done all these great things. Environment is outstanding. Overall, we concur, blank, blank, blank. It is innovative and significant. Okay? Quote and quotes. So you just took their words in every single category that you're going to be judged on, and when you finish reading that, what is the person reading this thinking? Why can't we fund this grant? What were we thinking? Okay? This is about writing compelling arguments and being a good writer and crafting that and being compelling too, right? So that is the recipe. You thank them. You literally organize it by all the different review categories, and I'm sure Dr. Weidman and Schultz and others can share with you what that NIH review criteria looks like. But we literally organize it by that, and we give them each of those criteria sections. Here's how it's great, here's how it's great, here's how it's great. Then you come in and you say, and by the way, we are so committed to this. Since our last R01 submission, we have continued working in this area. Let me tell you the great progress we've made since. And if you haven't made any progress between your submission and when you find out, which is obviously sometimes you're resubmitting this like 8 months later, well, that's a shame. Because you should be committed in making progress to your work in between. Because you should be committed to doing this regardless of what's going on. And that's what you want the reviewers to say. To see, I'm doing this, and look at what else I've already done since you saw me last time. And by the way, whether you fund me or not, I'm going to keep doing this. Because then what